Welcome back, guys. I got my charcoal drawing here of my self-portrait. I added a few more details of that foliage, just kind of abstractly thrown on there. And then I spray fixed it with some spray fixative. You can also use hairspray in a bind. All we're doing is putting just a clear coat, very lightly, like aerosoled over the top, so that we're not disturbing any of the marks that we've put down. That way, when we go to apply paint or a layer of charcoal over the top, it's not going to disturb those. So I'm going to work in paint today. I've laid out kind of my limited palette for today. You can also do this with some vine charcoal. Just put it on there and spread it around and then pull it off, or create some dust and rub it on there lightly with a napkin or cloth if you want to follow along and you don't have paint at home. But I'm going to be using paint. So the palette I've set up today is all transparent. That's key for this kind of method, this pick out or wipe out method. And I touched on this really briefly in the landscape painting where we did the same thing, but I just wanted to kind of reiterate some of the things that I'm thinking about. So it has to be transparent because we're only using the white of the paper or the canvas to get our lightest lights. So everything has to be like from the lightest light to the darkest darks. We have to have that transparency to give us all those midtones and halftones. And then I've got a yellow, a red, and a blue. So my three primaries, but they are very subdued versions of each. We've got an Indian yellow, which is kind of a warm orangey yellow, but very transparent. We've got the transparent oxide red, which is kind of a rusty red, and then a Payne's gray, which is a blue-black gray, all transparent. And I'm going to use, I had the idea of just sticking with the yellow and the blue to make a very dull green to work with, since the background's going to be very abstract foliage, and then painting the face in that same thing to kind of unify the composition. But I'm worried that as an underpainting, when I go over the top in my more finished opaque flesh tones, that even though they will be opaque, oil paint has a transparency and it becomes more transparent over time, just even the opaque colors. So I'm worried that if I go too green for an underpainting, that might end up coming through in the end, maybe not immediately, but over time, and kind of giving a jaundice skin tone color. So I'm going to mix my blue and my yellow to create a green, kind of a dark army-ish green, sap green, to apply to the back for the foliage, and maybe bring a little bit into the face, into the shadows, where we might get some of that bounce or reflected light and color, and then stick to mostly this transparent oxide red for my underpainting wipeout flesh tones. And it'll give us a process a little bit like this kind of coloration, which will be really nice for the shadows. It'll kind of keep the shadows nice and warm, those deep, dark warms. And then I can add some cool, light, opaque colors over the top of that when I start painting my overpainting, which will be more opaque. So I'm going to use my transparent oxide red, and then I'm going to mix these two together. And then I'm going to apply it up here to this vertical palette so that when I set up and start recording, you guys can see the painting and the palette at the same time. Okay, so I've got my portrait. I've got this gray toned palette paper up here, just so you guys can see the palette I'm working with. I transferred my pigments from my tabletop palette over here. This is the red. I put it closest just because I'm going to be using it the majority in here for the filming purposes, and then maybe towards the end I might show you guys some of the abstraction we throw in the background. That's more just expressive and fun. And I might sneak a little bit of it in here just while I have it into the leaves, because that almost becomes part of the portrait close there. And I just have the yellow and the blue, and then a mixture of green that has a little bit more yellow in it, and a mixture of the green that has a little bit more blue in it. I'm going to try, I got the camera up over my shoulder, I'm going to try not to bump into it too much here. Sorry for the awkward angle. So one hard thing about filming painting is like you can't have the exact same view as I do, but we're going to try and make it work as best we can. Let's just go over a few of the tools I have. Canvas, paint, But then we also have the two types of brushes still play a part here. We're going to be applying a layer of paint over this and then working subtractively. So to do that, we can use just a lot of napkins. And remember, we're going to fold those into the shape of something we can really control, like a brush head. We also have I got Q-tips here, and makeup sponges work great because this gets dirty really quickly. So these are great to have on hand, and the makeup sponges actually work to like a kneaded eraser where you can kind of lighten without totally removing. I've also got the brushes, 2 of each kind, rough and soft. This will be more for if we have some unwanted texture in here for smoothing the paint down just very gently. And then this acts almost like a pen eraser. Just the coarseness of the bristles will make it easier to remove paint. Okay. So, oh, and the other last thing is an actual kneaded eraser. Very fine details. You don't use this too much, but you can use this to pick up paint, especially as it starts to set up and dry. All of these tools actually work just as well if you're using charcoal for your portraits. But remember, we're going to fix it first. That way, this doesn't get blurred out or erased when we apply either a layer of charcoal to it or a layer of paint, as I'm going to do. Okay, let's apply our first layer of paint. So remember I said I'm going to stick with the warmer red tones for the face. And as I mentioned earlier, all of these are pretty desaturated compared to their high chroma versions. This is actually the palette I stick to most often for my backgrounds and foliage. And so I thought it would be good just for the underpainting, which you usually want to keep a little bit more desaturated. There is sometimes the approach where people would do a very bright colored background and then try and paint over the top of it, and then parts of it kind of peek through, which is an exciting kind of effect to have. But I find it hard when there's a really bright background, a really colorful background, to put down accurate opaque passages over the top, because you're putting down, when we go in and we put down the actual skin tones in here, if I put it next to something super bright, then it's going to throw off the relative. It'll be hard to judge it relatively. So we usually stick with more neutral underpainting tones, like I did for the landscape painting, which was kind of a desaturated brown. But let's go ahead and apply some. I just took my palette knife, grabbed some paint. We're just going to scrape it over the top here. And if your drawing is fixed, it shouldn't be a problem. I'm going to try and keep, looking at my reference, I like that white paint, the gesso showing through around my face, so I'm going to keep this all within my head. It's okay if it kind of floats up here, that's going to get covered up with foliage, but I like this white and that white, so I don't want to get that on there. Now, if you're doing yours in charcoal, then you can cover the entire thing. And you'll see when we do that with the green in a little bit here, the nice thing about this method is it really creates for an atmospheric quality. This is going to end up being a little bit hard-edged, I think. And the benefit of this quality, or this approach, is that you can make it very atmospheric, because everything's soft-edged and fuzzy. So it's very forgiving, it's very close to how we actually see. Soft-edged, and so it's a nice way to at least start a painting instead of going in all hard-edged. So just get a nice coverage on there. I added a little bit of medium to my paint, just so it's a quick dry medium, so I can, if I like this and I'm feeling like I have enough energy today, hopefully it'll set up today or by tomorrow, and so I can go in and do the opaque passages for you guys. Otherwise, you'd want to wait, especially when you get into some of these colors. That's another reason, like, usually burnt umbers or umbers, earth colors are used for this, because they have a tendency to dry quicker than some of these colors. Like this one stays wet for a very long time. So I just added a little bit of medium to help speed up the process. And then go like this and spread it around. It's okay if you lose your drawing a little bit, expect that. We're gonna find it again. Hopefully you'll watch this video right after you watch the linear construction video of how we got this, so then you know that we don't have to go super detailed in that construction, because a lot of it gets lost again. But don't be afraid, don't feel like it's all redundant. It might feel that way but it's all just practice. It's like when you paint a model, and if you work with the same model multiple times, you become really familiar with the structure of their face and the pitfalls of working with that model. And then it becomes a lot more fun because you don't mess up in the same place twice. You go, oh, you know, I didn't capture my nose that great, so maybe look for that next time. And so the process becomes a lot more fun because you have kind of a little roadmap. So all of these drawings are just informing the next stage, which can be more fun, more accurate, and quicker. Whereas if we didn't spend as much time on each one, you'd probably be struggling with the next layer a little bit longer. Now that might be a little bit light. What I'm looking at in my reference is some of the darker spots. The charcoal coming through kind of actually helps push these a little bit darker. You may be looking up in here. We can always go back in and add paint. But if we think back to the reductive drawing I did of the egg, how I went a little bit darker when I was in the studio, I think I'm gonna do that now. Because we can always lighten up, we can always pull off. So I want to keep this as reductive as possible for your guys' sake, just to show you. So I'm going to end up pulling a lot of this paint off. So I'm aiming with this additions here where I know the shadows are going to be. And just like this is a great method for soft edges, what that equals is an excellent method for gradations. So it's going to give us soft edges all around here and blend this into the background but easily. It's also going to be really great for these form turns. If you watch the drawing video where we finished it up this week, we did tiling, which I'll do tiling on this in paint in the next stage. But to get that gradation in this stage, instead of tiling, we're just going to pull more and more off like we did with the egg. And so that's what's great about this method is you get those super soft gradations by just removing paint. Okay, hopefully you did a little bit of practice with this, with a simple object last week, because it really is something that takes just a little bit of getting used to. It's kind of like you have to start to anticipate the dry rates. Like I can tell some of this is setting up, soaking into the gesso underneath. So I know where I can press harder and lighter. It's very clumsy the first couple times you do this, getting used to how this stuff works, and the right amount of medium to the right amount of pigment or charcoal to pressure. It just takes a little bit of practice and getting used to. Now this this color plus white actually makes a really nice skin tone if you had to do a 1 to 2 pigment mixture. But all of this will end up getting covered up, maybe aside from some of like the dark creases in here. It'll be nice to have that really thin, and then it's using the white, so the light of the gesso is going to be coming through. It creates a really nice quality. Okay, so I think that's good coverage. I got let's get the neck in there. A little bit more pigment, a little bit more paint. And then I am wearing that shirt, but I wanted this to be a little bit more natural, so I don't know how, I haven't figured that problem out yet. I think I was just gonna maybe just paint in the neck and leave my shoulder getting this more sketchy quality, and so then I wouldn't have to define the hue or the fabric of it, so it'd be okay if it wasn't rendered all the way out. That way the viewer, if it's not rendered, the viewer might assume there's no shirt at all, and then it'd be more natural or fit more with the environment. And it's okay if I get some on the leaves. Remember, we can always pull it off. And some of these, I chose, it's Salal. I know I said flower crown last week, but it's Salal, so it's just all foliage. But it has really nice, especially in its twigs, and some of its, like, they're not berries, but little buds. are this color. So it's okay if a little bit of this gets into the leaves. For me, this probably is not going to apply to your painting per se, but this is just my thought process, because there is that undertone of warmth in there. And it's a nice red, so it'll complement it it'll complement all the cooler greens. Okay, same thing. I know it's going to be a little bit lighter over here where there's not the shadow, and a little bit lighter down here in my chest. And worst comes to worse, with these paintings, they're supposed to show, my idea here is supposed to show kind of my process of leaving some of the gesso marks and charcoal marks exposed. But often in the act of painting, you know, if I make a mistake, I have to kind of go back and fudge the authenticity of the actual process. And so I can always come back with some white oil paint and then paint in here and make it appear that the gesso didn't get any of this gunk on it. But just like going back to week 1, now that this is an acrylic clear prime on a canvas, so technically the size and then the priming, and then this is some modeling paste or gesso over the top, also acrylic based. Now I've put oil, so now I have to stop using acrylic. If I were to go in here with acrylic and accidentally get some in these parts that have oil, that's not going to be good for the archival quality of the painting. So now that I've started with my oils, now I can only do oil. Okay, so that's a couple areas covered here. Not use this, aside from that painting and then a figure painting I've done, I haven't used this bright or this strong of a underpainting color before. It tends to stain the canvas. So it's going to be a little bit of experimentation for me, but I think the vibrancy of it will be nice, especially in the shadows. Okay, so then for this, I like to start, we kind of applied the shadow tone over everything. We can use our linear drawing underneath and some of our structure marks to help figure out where we want to pick stuff out. And I kind of reserve my brushes towards the end, especially the kneaded eraser for the end. I like to start with just napkin and maybe the Q-tips. So that's where I'll start. And I like to start in the places of either the most bright spots, so the places where the light source, remember our light source is the sky up here for me. It'll be your either window or light for you. And I like to start in the most bright spots where that hits first and then work towards the shadow shape. And usually look for the largest area. So that's either going to be, I think the brightest on me is going to be this brow ridge and maybe the nose, a little bit in the chin there. But the neck seems to be catching a lot of light, and it is a big volume. So just like we constructed the cranium, big to small, working towards the smaller shapes, I'm going to start in the biggest area, and then it'll give me the biggest gradation from this light to shadow. And then I can go back in and kind of fine tune the smaller forms. Like I don't know if I'd want to start on the eyelid per se. I think I'd want to start more around to get that whole mass of the forehead and cheek, and then start to fine tune it. So I'm starting to pull up here. See the light catching on the collarbone down here. And so I like to use the same part of the rag because just like the egg drawing, it gets a little bit dirtier, and so it becomes a little bit less intense of a removal. So you get those nice soft gradations. And then we can always come in with the Q-tips and really pull out the bright spots. Maybe we see this in here. And unlike the tiling method that I'll do next week when we get into the opaque paint, this kind of gives us a chance just to play and literally feel out the form. I'm kind of just pushing paint, pulling paint off. It's a lot more forgiving. The only thing about it is you have to work quickly because it does start to set up, so you have about a session to finish these paintings before the paint dries. But I'm literally like trying to think, okay, the light's hitting here and rolling around the form. Whereas with the purely additive process of tiling and painting, you have to like you have to observe it, mix it, match it, and place it, and then move on. And so you have to be pretty sure and confident with your abilities there. So this is a chance to become more familiar with our forms of right now the neck, but then the face, your face. So see, I focused on those first. This one, I'm seeing a kind of a little bit of light, so I'm just gonna use this kind of dirtied Q-tip. Come in here and grab. It's kind of I think it's not reflected light per se, it's a little bit of a glancing light in here. And then now it's dirty enough that I'm going to go here and try not to pull up too much because I don't want to destroy that shadow. You can see how the Q-tip's nice, but it leaves those kind of striations. That's where these soft brushes work nicely. And I'm going to try and keep it pretty parallel to the surface of my canvas and my paint, not perpendicular. This is going to apply like the pressure of the tip of the bristles. So I'm going to go like this and try and just knock those striations down. See how it kind of smooths it out? This is the real benefit of having the soft and the coarse. Now if I did with the coarse brush, it would just leave a whole other set of striations. Like that kind of did right there, which is not the end of the world. Sometimes you want that, or you want to remove paint. But if you're looking to smooth and add paint, then you want to go soft. And this is all kind of a shadow shape, so I'm going to just simplify this. You can take these to a level of finish that is just gorgeous and completely well formed. I'm gonna grab a little bit of paint over here. And a finished painting in its own right. Shout out to Aaron Westerberg. He's done whole workshops on this method, and they're just gorgeous and simple. Great way to study the use of pigments, the use of value. You're drawing, you're using all the materials of an oil painter, but it's basically just a colorful drawing is what it is. I'll put some of his images up, but I sometimes just love these effects alone when you just limit it to this. Maybe a little bit more adding back in here for the shadow or the darkness of the facial hair creates. Now, kind of like a watercolor, you want to be careful you don't get too much pigment buildup where it has like that waterline edge kind of feel where the pigment groups right towards the edge of where you aim. So I'm trying to, I am using it more perpendicular to pull up some of the clumps of the pigment and then smooth it back out. Okay, so that is a good warm up down there in the neck, kind of less important area of detail. Working with charcoal, once you lay down this initial stage and you get some of these soft effects, you can always come back in with your charcoal pencil or graphite pencil and reinstate some of your hatching and deep darks. I see this gets nice deep dark up there. Okay, so now let's jump up into the face. back to my napkin. Let's start in, I think it's between the nose and the chin. Maybe just since we work down here, let's just work our way up. So remember I said even though the facial hairs down here is making this a drop in value, the cheek is protruding and receiving light. It's in the light side. Start here and then use that same part of the rig to kind of work my way up, getting that nice smooth gradation. Lighter. And then the bottom lip, right at the border of it, gets really bright. Now see that, I put some solvent on here, and so it created a really sharp edge, which defeats the benefits of this. So I'm gonna have to go back in and I'll push that to soften it again. But back to what I was saying, you can push these to a really high quality of finish and beautiful paintings in their own right, or what most of the time they are just underpaintings, and they in themselves become a roadmap then that makes the process more relative when you start applying your other layers. So when you go in and you've got all, what we're doing here is we're figuring out all our values. So especially, yes, in charcoal, that's where you would take it or finish it. But for an oil painting where I want to start adding color, the flesh tones over the top of this, I've already got my big kind of value statements figured out here. So now when I go to color, I just have to be thinking about, instead of the value, the saturation, and the hue, all I really have to think about is the hue and saturation of it, because the value is already down. So I'm just going in and I'm saying, okay, I like that value, match that value. Now think about the color. It's in the light of the sky, so kind of a cool light source, where I just blue plus the local color of the flesh, mix up that, and I'm just matching the value I already have. So it takes out, we're just making it a lot easier for us to start matching this. Okay, so that's feeling good. Maybe a little bit lighten this up here. There. The top lip is in shadow and the bottom one is sticking out in the light, so we're gonna pull some light there. Probably that's a good value for the top lip. We have that subtle light source on that other side, so I'll come in here, pull off just a little bit. The darkness under the bottom lip feels good, but then as the hair rolls back into light, I think it can get a little bit lighter. And I'm kind of tapping now because it's the texture of hair. Doesn't have to be a perfect gradient. And then a lot of paint's gonna have to get pulled off right here below the wings of the nose where there's no facial hair. And maybe pull down into the facial hair. Because yes, it is a dark local value, but kind of like the eyebrows, it still is affected by the light falling on the object. So it's very dark as it starts over here in shadow, and as it rolls in, you can see the skin underneath is bouncing some light back, and the hair itself is receiving some light, so it does lighten up. Well, you might have seen this. This is my, I mean, it's just a cane, but it's in place of what they call a maul stick, which is just a stick you can lean up against either a dry part of your canvas, so you don't have to rest your hand in the wet canvas. But the nice thing about a cane is it just hooks over the top of my easel, so I don't have to play. It can work on a completely wet canvas. So I'm gonna pull that light down into the shape I've decided for the facial hair. Okay, now the nose, jumping around a little bit because I can come back, take a big look at all this stuff in the end. So let's look at the nose. So the glabella is falling into kind of almost shadow, maybe dark halftones. So starting right below that and then pulling down to the ball of the nose. And then remember back to when we were talking about the side plane, the top plane, and we had a construction line in there, but that was more of a plane change that was catching a highlight rather than an actual line or darkening in value. So I'm going to pull out the side plane, then I can use my Q-tip to go in and pull out those highlights along the ridge. Dirty part of the rag for that kind of transition between the ball and the wing. And then clean part might be a little bit tiny. I'll switch to Q-tip to come in here for the wing of the nose. Got a little bit too far out there, so just putting a little bit more paint back on. Okay, got the wing, the highlights we mentioned. Kind of creeps all the way up there. Now overall, the whole front plane of the cheek is receiving a lot of light. This falls into some shadows, but this cheek part I can pull out. Now I can feel the paint setting up a little bit more. The tackiness is there, and same amount of pressure doesn't remove as much. Not the case if you're working in charcoal. You kind of have as long as you want to work on these, I guess would be the benefit of it. Okay. Get some of this glancing light. And then since I'm working on this cheek over here, maybe jumping over to this side, that is in shadow. It's darker than over here, but just like how we're catching this light right there and across there, it is throwing a little bit of lightness down in here. So we don't want it to be as bright as this, but we want it to be brighter than it is. And a little, see, it's creating that nice fuzzy edge, which rolls it back in space. Since I want the white to be there, I might have to go in there and add some white oil paint in there to clean it up, but still try and keep that roll. That is one hard thing about not painting a background in areas like this, is it's gonna throw that forward, even though it's further back than, up here. So that's kind of a pictorial problem I'm gonna have to deal with. And I'll probably just end up softening that edge a lot. I'll have to not make it come at us too sharply. Pulled up a little bit too much. The other thing, and I talked about this as far as creating a focal point in the drawing video, is that when we have a limited value range, and sometimes this is a nice color because it's a red, but it's a brown red, so it has a lot of darkness to it. If you were to use like a straight fire engine red, it's not going to have the value range inherently, so you're not going to be able to get the super deep darks you might, which isn't a bad thing. You'll just have to know that no matter how much paint you put on, it's not going to reach that dark of a value. Okay, now looking at the jaw. This is where maybe you could use a makeup sponge. I'm noticing that the shadow shape under the nose is darker, than the front and side planes of the nose, but maybe not as dark as I have it, the paint plus the charcoal down. So going in there and just using this to really controlledly pull up some of that pigment. Okay. Again, just learning about these forms, seeing how this kind of can come forward and it rolls up like so. Maybe getting a little bit of water or solvent to pull out this really bright ridge. And then let's get up into the cheek. Now we're getting to, it's even setting up more, which I'm actually liking, because it means that if I make a misstep and my napkin goes too far into a shape, it's not gonna destroy that shadow shape. So I think now that it's starting to set up, I'm gonna have a lot more subtlety to it, and so it's gonna be a little bit more forgiving. Okay, so I'm gonna put this on speed. I'm gonna stop talking. But big things to keep in mind here are identify your light source. Start with your biggest forms first. Get that gradient by starting with a clean napkin or Q-tip, or if you're using charcoal, like kneaded eraser. And then as you work away, you can, it gets dirtier and you can get into those more darker halftones. Then go in and pull out some of like the glancing light or the reflected light. And I'm just gonna push this in that direction. Okay, so I've taken this to a level that I'm happy with, at least as an underpainting. It's not the best rendered, but it's definitely got a lot more soft edges and a more sense of form than the charcoal kind of linear sketch did alone. And I think it'll help inform my choices of value when I put my overlayer or my overpainting down over the top of it. And then you can see I've started to go in and just add some of this warmth that I'm using in the underpainting of the face into parts of the background, just so it ties in a little bit better. Now I'm gonna go and switch to my green background paint and start to just get a little bit more expressive. Following the same kind of method here, sticking with the transparent so that they'll just be thin washes. It's probably not gonna look like much of anything today. I'm just gonna have fun and try and get some of this stuff filled in. Leave some of the white exposed in areas, but just get a base covering and kind of abstract light and dark. The lightness will come from leaving the canvas of the gesso exposed, much like this. The dark will come from the paint thickness, and then looking for warm and cool. So either more yellow or more blue. So I'll do that now.